She rode into town with death on her heels and vengeance in her heart, not knowing she was about to collide with the one man who could either save her soul or damn it forever. They said Cole Blackwood had no heart left to break, that the darkness had consumed every last piece of humanity he once possessed. But she was about to prove them all wrong in the most dangerous way possible. The dust cloud behind her horse told the story before she ever spoke a word. Someone was hunting her. Someone always was. But this time, she wasn't running away from danger. She was riding straight toward the eye of the storm, toward the man they called Shadow, the outlaw king who ruled the borderlands between two territories with an iron fist and a loaded gun. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky blood red, and somewhere in that crimson twilight, destinies were about to collide in ways no one could have predicted. Elena Rivera had one mission when she crossed into Blackwood territory, one purpose that had driven her through 3 states and countless sleepless nights. But fate has a twisted sense of humor, and the moment her eyes would meet his across that dusty saloon floor, everything she thought she knew about revenge, about justice, about herself, would shatter like glass under a bullet. Cole Blackwood had built his empire on fear and reputation. He trusted no one, needed no one. Until the woman with storm-gray eyes and secrets darker than his own walked through his door and changed everything. What neither of them knew was that her arrival would ignite a war that would burn through the territory like wildfire. A war fought not just with guns and blood, but with betrayal, passion, and impossible choices that would test every boundary they thought they had. If you're ready for a story that will grip your heart and refuse to let go, hit that like button and subscribe, because this tale of love and war in the Old West is just beginning. Cole Blackwood hadn't always been the man that mothers warned their daughters about. There was a time, long ago in a life that felt like someone else's memory, when he believed in honor and loyalty and all those pretty words that men used before they stuck a knife in your back. That was before the betrayal. Before the night, his entire world burned to ashes while he watched helplessly, bound and beaten, forced to witness the destruction of everything he loved. They had taken his family, his home, his trust in humanity itself, and left him with nothing but rage and the bitter taste of vengeance that never quite satisfied. Now he controlled a stretch of land that legitimate lawmen pretended didn't exist, a no-man's territory between 2 states where his word was the only law that mattered. He ran operations that existed in the gray spaces of morality, protection rackets that actually protected, gambling halls where the games were honest, and trade routes that moved goods, no questions asked. The locals feared him, but they also relied on him. He was the devil they knew, and in the lawless expanse of the borderlands, that counted for something. His compound sat on a mesa overlooking the valley, a fortress built from stone and suspicion. Every man who rode for him had been tested, pushed to their limits, because Cole Blackwood's first rule was simple. Trust was earned in blood, or not at all. He kept himself isolated even from his own men, maintaining a distance that made him more myth than man. They called him Shadow, not just because he moved like one, but because he had become one, a dark outline of the person he used to be, defined more by absence than presence. The rumors about him were legendary and mostly true. He had killed 17 men in fair fights, and God knows how many in unfair ones. He never missed a shot, never showed mercy to those who crossed him, never let emotion cloud his judgment. He had built these walls around himself carefully, brick by brick, scar by scar, until he believed he was untouchable, unreachable, safe in his isolation. But isolation has a price that compounds with interest over the years. Behind the cold exterior and the reputation that preceded him like a funeral march, there was a hollowness that grew wider with each passing season. He filled it with whiskey some nights, with violence others, but nothing ever quite reached the bottom of that emptiness. In the quiet moments before dawn, when even the darkness seemed to judge him, Cole sometimes wondered if he had become the very thing he once fought against, if in destroying his enemies he had destroyed himself in the process. His past haunted him in fragments and flashes. A young woman's laughter, cut short, the smell of smoke and burning wood, the feeling of helplessness that still woke him in cold sweats despite all the power he now wielded. He had spent 10 years building this empire not for wealth or status, but as a bulwark against ever feeling that powerless again. Every gun, every loyal rider, every strategic advantage was another layer of armor against a world that had already shown him its cruelest face. The warning signs had been accumulating for weeks before she arrived. Territory disputes growing more aggressive, rival operations pushing boundaries they had respected for years. Whispers of someone new moving into the region, someone with resources and ambition and no respect for the established order. Cole had weathered challenges before, crushed upstarts, and survived attempts on his life with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything else. This felt different somehow, but he couldn't articulate why. Just an instinct honed by years of survival that told him the wind was shifting in dangerous directions. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly know as he stood on his balcony that evening watching the sun bleed out across the horizon, was that the greatest threat to his carefully constructed world wasn't approaching with an army or an arsenal. It was riding alone on a black mare, with haunted eyes and a mission that would unravel everything he thought he understood about enemies and allies, about darkness and light, about the impenetrable fortress he had built around what remained of his heart. She came through the saloon doors like a storm given human form, and every conversation in the room died mid-sentence. Elena Rivera didn't walk, she commanded space, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation got you killed. Her riding coat was covered in dust from hard miles. Her dark hair escaped from its tie in wild strands that framed a face too striking to forget and too fierce to approach carelessly. But it was her eyes that truly captured attention, gray as gunmetal and twice as dangerous, scanning the room with an assessment that missed nothing. Cole saw her before she saw him, and for the first time in a decade, he felt something other than calculated indifference. Not attraction, though she was beautiful in that sharp-edged way that warned of cutting yourself if you got too close. Not concern, though she was clearly trouble wrapped in leather and determination. It was recognition, though of what he couldn't say. Like his soul knew hers from some other lifetime, some other version of themselves that hadn't been broken and hardened by the world. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and the air itself seemed to charge with electricity. She didn't look away, didn't show the fear or respect that every other person in his territory displayed. Instead, she walked straight toward his table in the back corner, each boot fall deliberate and final as a judge's gavel. His men moved to intercept, but he raised one hand, stopping them cold, because something about this woman demanded to be heard. And Cole Blackwood hadn't survived this long by ignoring his instincts. She stopped 3 feet from his table, close enough to talk, far enough to draw if needed. That told him she had training, real training, not the clumsy gun handling of amateurs playing outlaw. Her hand rested near her hip, casual but ready, and he noticed the way her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, poised for movement in any direction. Would you trust someone who rode alone into the territory of the most dangerous man in the West? Or would you assume they're either foolish or plotting something far more dangerous than a simple confrontation? Drop your answer in the comments. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and controlled, carrying just far enough for him to hear but no further. She had secrets then. Things not meant for the ears of everyone present. That made 2 of them. Her words cut through the tension like a blade through silk. She wasn't there to challenge him. Wasn't there seeking employment or asylum or any of the usual reasons people sought out Cole Blackwood. She was there with information, and the price of that information was his attention and his temporary protection. He should have turned her away, should have recognized the complication she represented, and eliminated it before it could take root. But when she leaned forward and whispered the name of his oldest enemy, the man he had thought long dead, the man responsible for the night that had destroyed his former life, Cole felt the ice around his heart crack just slightly. She knew things she shouldn't know, had access to intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. and the way she looked at him suggested she understood exactly what kind of weapon she was wielding. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, a simple movement that carried the weight of a decision he suspected he would regret. She sat with the grace of a predator, and in that moment, Cole Blackwood had no idea he had just invited his salvation and his damnation to share his table. They spoke in careful circles at first, two predators establishing dominance and boundaries, each word weighed and measured for weakness. Elena told him about Colonel Marcus Maddox, a name Cole hadn't heard spoken aloud in 10 years, a ghost he thought he had buried along with his past. But ghosts had a way of refusing to stay dead, especially when they were men as ruthless and ambitious as Maddox. She laid out intelligence that proved Maddox was not only alive, but thriving, building an empire that made Cole's operation look like a child's game, and now he was coming to claim the borderlands as his own. Cole listened with the practiced stillness of a man who had learned to show nothing, reveal nothing, but inside his mind was racing through implications and strategies. If what she said was true, and his instincts screamed that it was, then he was facing a threat that his guns and reputation couldn't simply eliminate. Maddox was a tactician, a former military commander who understood logistics and warfare in ways that street-smart outlaws never could. He would come with resources, with trained men, with a systematic approach that would dismantle Cole's network piece by piece. The question that burned brighter than strategy was why Elena was telling him this. What possible motivation could she have for warning the man called Shadow about an approaching storm? When he asked her directly, she met his gaze without flinching and told him a truth that was probably wrapped around several lies. Maddox had destroyed her family, burned their ranch, killed her father and brothers for refusing to sell their land. She wanted revenge, but she was smart enough to know she couldn't take it alone. She needed someone who understood Maddox's methods, someone with the resources and ruthlessness to match the Colonel's own. It was a devil's bargain, and they both knew it. Trust between them was as likely as snow in August, yet circumstance had forced them into an alliance neither wanted but both needed. Cole agreed to let her stay, to pool their intelligence and plan a defense, but he set conditions that were non-negotiable. She would stay at the compound under guard, she would surrender her weapons at night, and she would understand that one hint of betrayal would be her last mistake. The days that followed were strange and tense in equal measure. They worked together, mapping Maddox's supply lines and identifying weaknesses in his approaching operation. Elena proved herself more than capable, her strategic mind sharp and her knowledge of Maddox's methods disturbingly thorough. She trained with his men, matching them, move for move, earning grudging respect from outlaws who respected nothing but skill and courage. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls between them began to develop cracks. It started small. A shared glance during planning that lasted a heartbeat too long. The way his hand steadied hers when examining maps by lamplight, both of them aware of the contact, and neither pulling away immediately. Late-night conversations that drifted from strategy into more personal territory. Stories of their pasts traded like currency. Each revelation a small act of vulnerability that should have felt dangerous, but somehow didn't. Cole found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing details he had no business noticing. The way lamplight caught in her hair, the precise economy of her movements, the rare smile that transformed her face from beautiful to devastating. He told himself it was tactical awareness, keeping close watch on a potential threat. But he had been lying to himself for 10 years, and he was getting worse at believing his own deceptions. Elena felt it too, this thing building between them that had no name and no future. She caught herself seeking his approval, lingering in rooms after meetings ended, finding excuses to work alongside him rather than separately. He was nothing like what she expected. Beneath the reputation and the hardness was a man who protected those weaker than himself, who paid his people fairly, who carried wounds that mirrored her own. She had come prepared to use him as a tool for her vengeance, but the reality of Cole Blackwood was far more complicated and far more dangerous to her heart than any physical threat could ever be. Then, the messenger arrived with Maddox's ultimatum, and everything changed. The colonel knew she was there, knew about their alliance, and his terms were brutally simple. Deliver Elena Rivera to him within 3 days, or watch everything Cole had built burn to the ground. The silence after the messenger left was deafening, heavy with implications that crushed like physical weight. Cole's men looked to him for direction, hands hovering near weapons, ready to fight or die on his word alone. But Cole was looking at Elena, searching her face for answers to questions he hadn't yet formed. She had gone pale, her composure cracking for the first time since she arrived, and in that moment of vulnerability, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition. She knew this was coming, had perhaps even expected it, which meant there were layers to this situation he hadn't uncovered. He cleared the room with a gesture, leaving only the two of them in the war room surrounded by maps and plans that suddenly felt useless. When he spoke, his voice carried the dangerous quiet that his men had learned meant violence was a hair's breadth away. He asked her the question that was tearing through his mind like a bullet. Why would Maddox demand her specifically? Why would a man building an empire care about one woman seeking revenge? What wasn't she telling him? Elena's facade shattered like glass under pressure. The truth came out in fragments, each one cutting deeper than the last. She was Maddox's daughter, his only child, raised in his shadow and trained in his methods. The story about her family, about revenge, it was all true but incomplete. Maddox hadn't destroyed her family out of land greed. He had destroyed them because her mother tried to escape his control, to give Elena a different life away from his darkness. She was 8 years old when she watched her father burn down the only home she ever loved, and she spent the next 15 years pretending to be his loyal daughter while plotting his destruction from the inside. Her mission when she rode into Cole's territory wasn't born from chance or desperation. Maddox had sent her himself, a perfect infiltration wrapped in a story designed to appeal to Cole's sense of vengeance. She was supposed to get close, learn his defenses, find his weaknesses, then deliver that intelligence back to her father before the attack. It was manipulation at its finest, using Cole's own pain as the weapon against him. But something had gone wrong with the plan, she said, and the way she looked at him made Cole's chest tighten despite his fury. She had expected a monster, someone she could betray without guilt or hesitation. Instead, she found a man who carried his scars with dignity, who built something in the wasteland, who showed her that strength didn't have to mean cruelty. She had fallen for him, truly and completely. And that was never supposed to happen. Cole wanted to rage, to throw her out or worse, to let the betrayal harden into the familiar armor of hate that had protected him for so long. But he couldn't unhear the tremor in her voice when she told him she loved him, couldn't unsee the tears streaming down her face as she laid bare every manipulation and every genuine feeling tangled together. The woman who had deceived him was also the woman who had made him feel human again, and he didn't know which truth to believe. She didn't ask for forgiveness because she knew it was impossible. Instead, she offered him something more valuable, a way to win. She knew Maddox's complete strategy, his troop movements, his supply weaknesses, everything needed to turn certain defeat into possible victory. All she asked in return was that when it was over, Cole let her face whatever justice he deemed appropriate for her betrayal. She would give him the tools to destroy her father, even knowing it might mean her own destruction as well. He told her to get out, his voice rough with emotions he refused to name. She left without argument, and Cole stood alone in the war room staring at maps that suddenly offered a path forward, purchased with the currency of a love he couldn't afford to believe in. Outside, his men waited for orders. Maddox's army was days away, and Cole Blackwood had to decide whether to trust the woman who had lied to him about everything except, possibly, the one thing that mattered most. The war was coming whether he was ready or not. The battle for the borderlands lasted 3 days and 2 nights, a brutal symphony of strategy and survival that would be whispered about in saloons for decades to come. Cole used every piece of intelligence Elena provided, turning Maddox's advantages against him, transforming certainty into chaos. But it was Elena herself who became the deciding factor, returning in the midst of the fighting not with armies or weapons, but with the one thing that could truly defeat her father. The truth about his corruption, his crimes, his betrayals delivered to the territorial marshals with evidence that couldn't be ignored or bought. She rode back into the compound as the dust was settling, bloodied but alive, expecting judgment and perhaps execution for her deceptions. Instead, she found Cole standing in the ruins of his war room, exhausted and wounded, but victorious, looking at her with eyes that held something she couldn't quite name. He could have killed her. Should have. By every rule that governed his world. But Cole Blackwood had learned something in the fire of this war. Something about the difference between justice and vengeance. About the possibility of redemption even for those who wore their sins like second skins. Maddox was captured, not killed. Taken into custody by legitimate law that would see him tried and imprisoned for his crimes. Cole had broken his own pattern, chosen a different path than the one revenge had carved through his life, and in that choice he found something unexpected: peace. Not the complete erasure of pain or regret, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had become something other than what his enemies tried to make him. The days after the war were strange and tentative. Two wounded souls trying to figure out if trust could be rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Elena didn't ask for forgiveness because she understood it wasn't something that could be requested, only offered freely if at all. Instead, she stayed, helping rebuild, proving through actions rather than words that her feelings had been genuine even when her mission was false. She worked alongside his people, used her skills to strengthen rather than infiltrate, and slowly the compound that had been Cole's fortress became something closer to a home. They didn't speak of love, not directly, not yet. The wound was too fresh and the scars too new. But they spoke of possibilities, of territory that could be protected without brutality, of operations that could exist in the light rather than shadow. Of two people who had spent so long defined by their pain, learning to be defined by their choices instead. It was messy and imperfect and nothing like the stories where love conquers all with a single kiss, but it was real in a way that mattered more than poetry. The morning Cole found her on the mesa watching the sunrise, he stood beside her in comfortable silence before speaking the words that had been building in his chest like pressure. He told her that he didn't know if they deserved happiness after everything they had done and been through, but he was willing to fight for it every single day if she was. She turned to him with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted him from the moment she walked through his door, and she said yes. Some stories don't end with perfect resolution. They end with imperfect people choosing to build something better from the rubble of who they used to be. This was one of those stories, written in the hard country of the Old West, forged in fire and betrayal, and the stubborn refusal to let darkness have the final word. What do you think makes a love story truly powerful? Is it the perfect romance, or the messy, hard-won connection between flawed people? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective matters, and we want to hear what resonates with you about stories like this.